So no, I'm not cooking today. I just thought I'd show you my cooking pot. I've got some soup about to eat, some chicken bones, some potatoes, some onions, leeks, carrots, and all boiling together, and I'm going to have my lunch in a minute. And I'm going to be talking about motivation again today. I thought that my ideas that I gave on Tuesday could be expanded a little bit. So I'm going to talk more about motivating yourself to do what you really don't want to do, but you know you ought to do. Very difficult, because the part of you that doesn't want to do it usually is stronger than the part that does want to. So how do you tip the balance? Well, let's think about that. So the first thing that we have to think about is the nature of motivation itself. And when we start probing it deeply, what we realize is that it's not some simple phenomenon. We maybe have the bad habit of saying, I'm a lazy person, or I tend to procrastinate, and so forth. And as I've said in my previous video about motivation, that characterization of yourself in absolute terms is really pointless, because when you want to do something really badly, even if it's hard, you'll do it if you want to do it badly enough. And on the other hand, something that might even be to some extent attractive, you might not want to do under certain circumstances. So we have to take the context into consideration always. That's point number one. So we can't just say, I am hardworking or I am not hardworking. It's under what circumstances are you hardworking, and under what circumstances are you not hardworking? I'd say that by and large, I'm not very hardworking much of the time, but in my teaching I tend to be, and that's because I find it really enjoyable. The work to me is not hard. Somebody else in a different situation, different context, might find exactly the same work really hard, really challenging, and it might be very difficult to be motivated towards. So that's a most important point. Second, there are different kinds of tasks that are hard, and what I want to eliminate from this discussion is trying to get yourself motivated to do things that you have physical difficulty with. And I don't mean physical difficulty like going to the gym. I mean physical difficulty with things that perhaps you are addicted to. Now, I mentioned last time the problem with giving up smoking. I don't smoke now, but I smoked for quite some time. Over the last 6 or 7 years, cigars and also cigarettes. And it had to do with boredom as much as anything else. I wouldn't say boredom in the sense of sitting around being bored. I mean, doing something that I needed to take a break from periodically and not knowing how to take a break except by smoking a cigar. And it's physically pleasurable. Smoking can release dopamine in the brain, which is a pleasure trigger. And it's hard to give that up physically. That's a very difficult thing in comparison with learning a language. Like, not the same at all. Like giving up smoking or giving up sugar or giving up alcohol or giving up caffeine may be something that you both want to do and don't want to do because your body, your actual cells are saying, I don't want to do this. That's very different from saying, I don't want to learn my Khmer vocabulary today, or I don't want to learn my Chinese grammar today. It's a different order of things entirely. So I'm just going to talk about those things that you don't want to do, but you also do want to do them because of the potential results that that you will find pleasing in some way, as in the case of learning a language. If you are not fluent in a language, but you live in a country where a language other than your first language is common, you're at a disadvantage, as I am right now. I don't speak Khmer terribly well, but I live in Cambodia where everyone speaks a dialect of Khmer, and not very many people speak English. And a lot of people are shy of using English, even if they've learned some in school, and shy of foreigners, shy of people who speak English. A very interesting thing happened to me yesterday. I was out just looking at pagodas, as I do sometimes, and an old man approached me and started speaking French because Cambodia was a French colony at one time, and older, educated people often are able to speak French. And he saw me and recognized me as having European features, and so came over and started asking me questions in French. And that was interesting, but then we switched into Khmer, which he was more comfortable with. That being able to speak French, being able to speak Khmer, gives me advantages that I don't have if I don't speak those languages. So I've got that motivation, but it's not enough motivation to allow me to sit down at my desk and plug away at vocabulary day after day. Even if I establish a regimen, say, okay, 9 o'clock every morning for half an hour you're going to study Khmer verbs or Khmer prepositions or whatever. It's not motivation enough. Something else needs to happen, and the way I'm thinking about it is that maybe because of my personality, that there has to be joy in the process. And so what I think I may do at some point, when the pandemic is certainly more eased off and I've got a vaccine and everything, so I'll try to spend some time just talking to Khmer people. Maybe people who would like to improve their English. That's what I did when I lived in Italy. I wanted to learn some Italian. Didn't need to learn a lot. um, because my Spanish mostly helped. It's particularly interesting in northern Italy because a lot of people who had relatives in Argentina, and they spoke Argentine Spanish, so it's fine. But there are times when it would have been nice to be able to speak Italian. And I was introduced to an Italian woman who wanted to improve her English. And so we met in the evening for a couple of hours, a couple of times a week, half of the time speaking in Italian, half of the time speaking in English. And the reason it was fun for me was I really liked the woman I was talking to. And in fact, we ended up going out for a year. So you can turn something that you want to do into pleasure in all kinds of ways. That just happened to be one. But it would have been all right if I had just spent my time with an Italian man who was a friend. I had several very good friends. I could have spent a couple of hours, a couple of times a week with anybody. Would not have been quite so enjoyable, and I would not have had quite the motivation that I did, but possible. So that leads me to another point, which is that motivation is not one thing. It's not a matter of saying I am not easily motivated to do such and such, or I am easily motivated. It's very much dependent on what we're talking about. I have no problem, zero problem, being motivated to write. I find it immensely enjoyable. I do find it difficult to get motivated to ride my bicycle every day. And that's a real challenge because I should get exercise every day. Like my brain stiffens up as well as my body if I don't. But just getting out the door and getting to my bicycle and getting on. Once I'm on it and I'm riding, everything's fine. But switching from like sitting at my desk and writing, which I enjoy doing, riding my bicycle, which I enjoy doing, but making the transition, that's a problem. And there's no real easy solution to that one, except a certain kind of discipline, or as I was saying last time, a certain kind of habit, which I'm reluctant to do. I'm reluctant to organize my day saying like at 9 o'clock every day I will go on my bicycle or whatnot. Partly because in the monsoon season that's not effective. And I just don't like organizing my day habitually. What I have to do is I have to find some way to excite myself enough to motivate myself to get out the door. So in all of this ramble, what I'm really saying is on two things really. I'm saying that certain things that prevent you from doing things that you know you ought to do are complicated because they involve physical inhibitions, like addiction, for example. All right, that's one thing. But if it's something that you are physically quite capable of doing but don't want to do, like you don't want to study for a test, or you don't want to write an essay, or you don't want to read a passage for homework for a class or whatever, you have to find the reason that you are doing it in the first place. And that is always a big challenge. As a teacher, that was a challenge for me, to motivate my students to read part of a book when at the outset they just didn't want to do it. And they would tell me, oh, it's boring, it's dry, it's repetitive, or whatever. And I used to say, do you think I'm asking you to read this passage as a punishment? Like that I'm saying to myself, I'll get them this week. I'll make them read Marx or Weber or Durkheim. It's really awful reading, it's tough, it's boring. Right, but I'm a teacher. You know, that's not how it works. So what I would have to do is I would have to explain why it's important, and I would also have to explain that if they don't find it engaging, I haven't taught it well enough. I haven't explained why this is a critical text to read. I mean, I used to also say this to my students about required courses. I used to say, do you think that the faculty all sit down and they say, well, like, which classes are the most tedious, the most boring, the most difficult, and make them required courses just to punish all the majors? Like, no. Every course is required because we consider it to be the backbone of the subject. And if you don't like them, then in a sense you don't like our subject, which is all right. I mean, it's fine. I had students who didn't like anthropology. It's okay, but if you're a major but you don't like studying classical theory, well then you might want to question whether this is the right subject for you. If you're not fascinated by the work right at the outset, I could say, well, you're in the wrong place. That what you need to do is to find that place where you are fascinated, where you are excited, where you are joyful. Maybe I'm being idealistic. I don't know. I can't say. And I don't want to give advice. But it's what works for me. I have to find the joy in everything. And when I find the joy, I find the motivation. That's the key. So there it is. I've got to find the motivation to cook for you on Tuesday. And part of that has to do with eating the food that I've already cooked for you, and I'm not getting through fast enough. I've eaten all of the pralines, but I'm still working on the Turkish delight. But maybe by Tuesday I'll be through it enough to be able to make honeycomb. We'll see. Meanwhile, please tell your friends about my videos. Please like, please subscribe, and have a good weekend.